This is the flag of Vietnam, but did you know that once upon a time Vietnam had two flags? Well, in today's video, let's find out more. So technically speaking, it's not Vietnam that had two flags, but once upon a time Vietnam was split into two countries. And so the other flag is the flag of South Vietnam, the informal name for the Republic of Vietnam. While the other flag was that of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, also known as North Vietnam. Let's start our flag story in 1862, when the French started to take over parts of what would become known as French Indochina, today's countries such as Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and a few others. This meant that for a long time these countries were represented by the French flag, as they were various colonial entities being ruled over from France. However, in 1941, following the takeover of France by the Germans in Europe, the Japanese and some of their allies, including the Thai, would take over the French colonies in Asia. And so the French administration there handed over control to the Japanese, and this prompted a rebellion from the local people, who some of which would become known as the Viet Minh, being led by their leader Ho Chi Minh, a prominent socialist who had been educated in France. They adopted as their flag a yellow star on a red background. It was claimed by the Vietnamese government in the 1980s that the flag had actually been designed a year earlier in 1940 during an insurrection against French rule at the time by an individual called Nguyen Hue Dien. However, later doubt was cast on this version of events, and it was instead suggested that the real designer of the flag was Le Quang So. However, it's unclear which of these individuals was actually responsible for coming up with the flag, although given it's a fairly simple one with the bog standard communist iconography of red and stars and such, perhaps it's quite understandable that they went with this flag in the end. So it's been said in the memoir of Nguyen Hue Dien that the 5 points on the star represent different groups of society, one being the peasants, another the traders, another the soldiers, the intellectuals, and the workers. The colours are also significant, the red standing for the blood of the people sacrificed in revolution, and the yellow being the skin of the Vietnamese people. It should be noted, however, that red and yellow were already important colours in Vietnamese vexillology and heraldry before this point, especially for the ruling Nguyen dynasty, a name that really doesn't set you up for failure. They had been ruling in large parts of what is today Vietnam before the French takeover, and continued to be a powerful force there later on, with this being their dynastic banner. In 1945, towards the end of the war, the Japanese set up a short-lived Vietnamese empire being ruled by members of the dynasty who adopted this flag with red and yellow featuring prominently on it, as we can see, although soon this was taken over, because in 1945, at the same time, the Viet Minh started to take over parts of the country while the French reappeared in the south. The French would create several new colonial entities in the area of French Indochina, and they would give them quite similar flags with 3 vertical stripes of blue and then a background of yellow. These would then later in 1948 be joined by this flag, which would become the new flag of this entity that would bring all of these colonial properties in French Indochina into one single country. This flag would then later be adopted by the independent Republic of Vietnam following France's withdrawal from the region in 1954 after they lost the Battle of Dien Bien Phu against the Viet Minh. This would lead to the separation of French Indochina into various states, the two that we're interested in for this video being the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, or North Vietnam in the north, and the State of Vietnam, or later Republic of Vietnam, in the south. Now in 1955, a year after, the North decided to change up their flag a little bit. The star became a little bit less chunky, and so we basically get the version of the flag that continues to be used in Vietnam today. So we had the situation that North Vietnam was using the flag on the right and South Vietnam was using the flag on the left. Now in 1969, of course, the Vietnam War is kicking off. The Americans were getting involved, and other nations too, in this war in South Vietnam. And at this time, the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, more commonly known by the shortened version of the name for the Vietnamese Communist Party, the Viet Cong, also decided to adopt their own flag based on the North Vietnamese flag by simply adding in a blue stripe on the bottom. So this became the Viet Cong's flag, clearly inspired by North Vietnam, although technically a separate entity. They were following orders from North Vietnam. Sometimes this one is also seen with a green stripe on the bottom instead of a blue one. Now in 1979, 10 years after the adoption of the Viet Cong's flag, this would really bring the Vietnam War to a close with the fall of Saigon. As American forces had already pulled out of the country and South Vietnam's army collapsed, North Vietnamese and indeed Viet Cong troops stormed into the South Vietnamese capital and took over. This would lead to the North and South of Vietnam becoming one country, the Republic of Vietnam, and they would then choose the flag of North Vietnam to represent them. Although it should be said that today, many emigres living particularly in the United States, but also in other countries who left Vietnam around the fall of Saigon or beforehand, still sometimes associate with the old flag of the Republic of Vietnam, so the yellow flag with 3 stripes. And I think aesthetically, it's quite a cool looking flag. It's pretty interesting in that way. But I'd be interested to know, what do you think about the flags in this video? I think the Vietnamese flag, has a certain look to it, but it's quite a bog standard sort of communist flag, whereas, the Republic of Vietnam had quite an interesting one. Anyway, let me know in the comments below. I have been Hilbert, and these have been the flags.